I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of hot coffee, looking out the window at the rainy night when the phone rang. It was a normal evening, nothing special, but that call made me shudder. The number was unknown. Accepting the challenge, I heard only heavy breathing, something cold and strange as if someone had just run a marathon, but did not utter a word. I put the phone down, thinking it must be some kind of mistake. Maybe a random dial. But something about that breath made me wary. It was almost midnight, and a few minutes later the call rang again. This time it was a voice, hoarse like a whisper, that whispered, "I see you." I got up from my seat and walked over to the window, wondering who could have said that. The night was dark, only the street lamps dimly illuminated the road, but there was not a single living soul. Everything looked too quiet and peaceful. I closed the windows and doors, checking all the locks. I wasn't paranoid, but something made me wary this time. A few minutes later, I heard a light knock on the door. A chill ran down my back. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down, went to the door and looked through the window. No one. The door was still closed, but I felt someone's gaze, as if someone was watching me from outside. I walked back into the living room as the lights began to flicker. It was as if the lamp was about to go out, but suddenly lit up brighter. It was an old house and the electrics could sometimes go wrong, so I chalked it up to technical issues. But suddenly he noticed movement in the shadows on the floor, as if someone was slowly sliding along the wall. Coming closer, he stopped, looking into the darkness. The figure seemed black and blurred, without a face, but with long limbs that stretched to the floor. I instantly froze in place, trying to figure out if it was a shadow from the tree outside the window or something else entirely. My heart was beating faster, and I suddenly realized that a figure was moving towards me. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, an old candlestick on the table, and braced myself for any scenario, even though I didn't fully understand what was really going on. The figure stopped at the front door, and I heard a rustling sound as if someone had been scraped against a tree. Fear gripped me, and I decided that the only option was to quickly run outside. I opened the door, and the wind hit me in the face, soaking everything. The rain was falling harder and harder, and I ran down the road without looking back. But after running a few meters, he heard clear footsteps behind him. They were heavy but fast, almost rhythmic, as if someone was deliberately following my pace. I quickened my steps, my heart pounding in my chest and my breathing heavy. There was one thought in my head: who or what is following me? And why? I couldn't afford to stop. He began to look around, but saw nothing but darkness and drizzling rain. Suddenly the steps stopped. I stopped and listened, but heard nothing but the rain. Dropped to my knees trying to catch my breath and thought maybe it was just my fear playing a mean joke on me. But when I raised my head, I saw a dark figure standing a few meters away, looking straight at me. The figure seemed unreal, almost transparent, but her eyes, they burned like two small lights, piercing me with their gaze. I couldn't tear myself away from them. Something about this look was inhuman, as if this creature knew all my fears and enjoyed my terror. I jumped back, almost falling to the ground, but quickly got up and ran on. I didn't know where I was running, I didn't know how it would end, but one thing was clear: I needed to run and run faster. The street lights were fading, leaving me alone with this unknown being. Next will be. I ran, not paying attention to the wet clothes sticking to my body, to the cold that made its way to my bones. The street lights were dimming and it was getting darker all around. An old, abandoned building appeared ahead. Perhaps it was an old warehouse or factory. All the windows were boarded up with wooden boards, but one door stood half open, as if someone had just entered. There was no time to think. I rushed inside, closing the door behind me, hoping it would delay the pursuer at least a little. It was cold and damp in the building, and the smell of old wood and mold stung the nostrils. Rusty hooks hung here and there on the walls, and the floor was covered with broken glass and trash. I cautiously moved deeper, trying to find a place to hide. Suddenly he heard the floor creak behind him. Looking around, he saw shadows flickering on the walls. It seemed that the same eyes, like two burning points in the darkness, were looking directly at me. I sat up trying to catch my breath and saw one of the shadows start to move. She began to approach slowly, almost confidently. Suddenly, a whisper was heard, as if from different directions at the same time. "You shouldn't have come here." This whisper was cold, as if it made its way through the very soul. It became louder and louder, as if voices surrounded me from all sides. They whispered to each other, sometimes laughing a low, husky laugh. I covered my ears with my hands, trying to drown them out, but it didn't help. The voices kept ringing in my head. Suddenly, a sound like steps on broken glass was heard in the corner of the room. He looked around and saw something crawling on the floor, leaving behind long bloody tracks. My heart pounded in my chest and one thought echoed in my head, this can't be true. I realized that staying here is death. I lurched forward, clawing my way through the debris on the floor. The window in front, covered with rusty netting, looked like the only way out. I swung and slammed my fist into the glass, shattering it into small pieces. My hands were bleeding from the cuts, but I didn't stop. Crawling through the broken window, I heard something screeching on the floor behind me as if getting closer and closer. Getting out, I ran without turning around. My heart was pounding in my chest, blood was pouring from the wounds on my arms, but I ran, feeling the cold fear that hardened inside me come closer with each step. Outside, the light was fading again. I ran across the field to the woods ahead, hoping that the thick trees might offer me some protection. The forest was dark, the trees stood like huge ghosts, and their shadows stretched long black arms to the ground. Deeper in the forest he found a small cave, half hidden by a large stone. I crawled inside, gritting my teeth in pain, trying not to breathe too loudly. He could hear his heart pounding in his chest and tried to calm himself down. The rain had already subsided, but left behind a thick, heavy veil of fog. I sat in the dark, watching the shadows move slowly outside the cave. It seemed to me that they were beginning to form into figures that resembled human faces, changing and spinning as if in a spinning vortex. Suddenly he heard a strange melody. It echoed from the depths of the forest, at first softly, then louder. It was a hoarse, drawn-out whistling sound that turned into music. The melody was hypnotic, yet terrifying at the same time, like a funeral march slowly gathering momentum. I was filled with horror. I remembered stories of people disappearing in these places and no one knowing what happened to them. Each legend had its own version, but they all came down to one thing: something was wrong, alien, inhuman. I heard voices again, but this time they were not like the previous ones. They seemed to sing along with the melody, stretched in unison with the music, and each word cut the ear like a blade. The voices repeated the same word: come back, come back. Every time that word was repeated, I broke out in a cold sweat. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. Something about this place wanted me, something out of this world. I stood up, took a step towards the exit of the cave, and heard something crackle behind me as if someone was rising from the ground. I turned around and saw the ground moving behind me as if someone was trying to get out. He ran again, realizing that this night was far from over. I ran through the forest, the trees flickering in front of my eyes, and every step was accompanied by pain in my legs. The ground under my feet was slippery and I almost fell several times. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I noticed that the melody and voices were left behind. The forest became quieter, but this did not bring relief. On the contrary, it scared even more. Suddenly I saw movement in front of me. The shadows began to dance between the trees again. They moved quickly, changing shape, and there was something extremely abnormal in every movement. As if the shadows did not obey the laws of physics, they appeared and disappeared in strange positions, as if they were playing some invisible game. I paused, trying to collect my thoughts. I am haunted by something that is not human. But is this really reality, or is my mind playing tricks on me? Maybe this is all just the fruit of my fear? But then I heard the same whisper again. This time it was right behind me. I turned around and saw a strange object begin to form out of thin air right in front of me. At first it looked like a hazy spot, but it quickly became clearer and took on the shape of a mirror. I stood there, fascinated, looking at myself in the reflection, but I saw not quite my figure. It was my face, but distorted, contorted with terror and despair. The eyes in the mirror burned with madness, and the lips moved as if trying to say something, but no sound came from the mirror. Suddenly, my reflection began to move on its own, independent of me. It raised its hand and began to knock on the glass as if it wanted to break out. The glass of the mirror cracked and a black liquid began to drip from it. I recoiled, realizing that something was coming through that mirror, something that shouldn't be in this world. I ran without looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. But the forest seemed to be changing around me. The trees grew denser, the branches reaching out like arms trying to stop me. I felt trapped, each step leading me deeper into this endless darkness. Suddenly I saw a faint light ahead. It flickered like a candle in the thick darkness. I had no choice but to go there. Maybe it was a chance for salvation? Maybe I will find a way out of this nightmare there? As I got closer, I saw an old carnivore standing in the center of a small clearing. Light poured in from her window and I could hear soft whispers from inside. My hands were shaking, but I slowly moved closer. My mind told me not to go in there, but my legs carried me to the door. The door creaked as I touched it. Inside was a dim room lit by a single candle burning on the table. The walls were covered with old, yellowed newspapers and clippings of some kind of missing persons article in the area. There were scattered things on the floor: shoes, clothes, old toys. They all looked as if they had been left here in a hurry. I slowly approached the table and saw that the candle was burning right on top of the old photo album. I opened it and my eyes widened in horror. These were pictures of me. My photos are from different places: at work, at home, on a walk. Some of them were obviously made quite recently because I remembered those days. But who could make them? And why were they here? Suddenly there was a sound as if someone was rustling behind. I turned sharply but saw nothing. My heart was beating faster again. I could feel sweat dripping down my neck. The room felt like it was closing in around me. The walls were getting closer, and the shadow from the candle was starting to grow, spreading across the entire wall. I tried to run back out, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I desperately tried to pull the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. Then he heard the sound of heavy breathing. It was quiet at first, but gradually became louder. That breathing was not human. Like something huge and abnormal was standing right next to me, waiting for my next move. I pressed myself against the wall, trying not to move, but I felt the shadow of the candle approaching me, like a hand reaching out from the darkness. The shadow slowly crept closer, absorbing all the light around it. My hands were pressed against the cold wall and I could feel every muscle in my body becoming rock hard with fear. The dark creature's breathing continued to grow louder, as if it was already standing a few steps away from me. I couldn't take my eyes off the shadow that almost reached my face. At that moment, the candle went out, leaving me in complete darkness. I heard something slither across the floor, crawling closer like a snake. My hands were shaking as I tried to find anything to defend myself with, but there was nothing on the table except an old photo album. Panic fear gripped me. I lunged forward into the darkness, hoping the door would open with the pressure, but something grabbed my leg sharply. I screamed and felt sharp fingers pinching my skin. I tried to break free, but they held me tight, pulling me back into the darkness. Suddenly, a loud crack was heard and the door suddenly opened. I fell to the floor, dropping the photo album. A faint light appeared again through the open door. I quickly got up and rushed to the exit without stopping or looking back. I ran out into the clearing and saw that the predator began to disappear into the darkness again, as if it had never been there. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to comprehend what had just happened. My thoughts were mixed, but one thing was clear: this forest was far from an ordinary place. It was something more, something ancient and very evil. I turned my head and saw a photo album on the ground at my feet. How did he get here? I didn't take it with me. When I opened it, I saw new photos. This time it was people I didn't know, but they all looked scared. All these people were standing in the same tent in which I had just been. Their faces expressed horror, and their eyes begged for help. But worst of all, on the last page was a picture of myself standing on the lawn, right where I was standing now. I threw the photo album away as if it had been poisoned and took a few steps back. The light around me began to dim and I heard the whispering again. This time there were more votes. They sounded from all sides, filling the air around me. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel them seeping into my brain, planting fear and despair there. Suddenly the voices grew louder, as if they were angered by my presence. I heard someone whisper right in my ear, "You shouldn't have come here." I turned sharply, but no one was there. Something invisible began to pull me back into the forest, and I tried my best to resist. I was dragged back into the thickets, and the air was suddenly filled with the heavy, sweet smell of decay. I felt nauseous and tried to cover my nose with my hand, but the smell was too strong. The outlines of some figures appeared from the darkness. They were indistinct, like dirty ghosts. They moved slowly as if something kept them in this place, forcing them to wander through the forest forever. These figures were all headed in the same direction, toward the predator that had now reappeared among the shadows. I could see them walking as if drawn by an invisible force. And each of them seemed utterly hopeless, like lost souls, lost forever. I felt something touch my hand. Looking around, I saw a pale hand reaching out of the darkness. She was cold as ice and was pulling me back to the predator. I tried to break free, but I felt my body become weak. I felt something invisible enter me, coldness and terror filling every cell. Suddenly a voice was heard, "You will never be able to leave here." My gaze mingled with the figures still wandering about, and I realized that this place was a trap for all who entered it. I continued to be pulled into the depths of the forest, and I felt an invisible force pulling me more and more towards the predator. I realized that I was wandering in circles. I saw the same trees, heard the same whispers, and smelled the same decay. This place played with me like a predator with its prey, and I was trapped in a trap that was getting tighter by the minute. Time did not exist here. I couldn't tell how long I had been here. I panicked and started running at random without thinking about direction. My heart was pounding in my chest and my lungs were burning from lack of oxygen, but I couldn't stop. It was like an escape from the inevitable, from something that had been haunting me for a long time. I ran out into a small clearing and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. In the middle of the lawn stood a large old mirror in a darkened frame. I didn't understand how it ended up here, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. I came closer and saw my reflection, exhausted and angry. My skin was pale and my eyes looked almost empty. But at that moment something changed. My reflection began to move independently of me. It first smiled and then took a step forward. I tried to step back but I couldn't, something held me firmly in place. The reflection suddenly spoke. It was you who brought yourself here. Your fears and your secrets. They are always with you. Suddenly, the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, and I felt myself engulfed in darkness. Walls of black stone suddenly appeared around me. I found myself in a labyrinth. The walls were closing in, forcing me to go only forward. I heard sounds coming from behind. Whispers, footsteps, someone's breathing. My heart was beating like crazy and I kept moving forward further and further. Every turn led me to a new corridor, but I never seemed to get a step closer to the exit. With each minute my fear became more real, as if the maze itself had come to life and was now closing in on me. I turned another corner and suddenly found myself in front of the same predator. It looked different. The windows were broken, the door was ajar, and darkness reigned inside. I realized I had no choice but to enter. As I stepped inside, I felt something cold embrace me like an invisible hand, and I began to hear the same whisper again, but this time the words became clearer. This is the end of you. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in front of me. I couldn't see her face but I could feel her gaze. She approached me step by step, and I realized that it was the same thing that had been haunting me all this time. The dark figure approached and suddenly said, "You shouldn't have come here, but now you will stay forever." I felt like my legs were stuck to the floor, I couldn't move. The figure reached out to me and I felt my world around me begin to fade away. The light went out and complete darkness enveloped me. I couldn't see or hear anything but my own heartbeat. The last thing I felt was the cold touch of something touching my face. Then silence. And everything disappeared. My last memory is fear. The fear that I was forever drawn by the mysterious power of this place and became a part of this eerie forest, forever losing myself in its dark depths. Now I understand why those who get here never come back. This was the end of my story, or maybe just the beginning.